Well, hello. For this short video, I want to just bring out what I like to call the 3 Ps of leading teams in a rapidly changing environment. And I'll use an aviation training lesson to illustrate this. I'll tell you what the 3 Ps are shortly, but let me just go into the aviation example that I want to use to kind of illustrate this. And this can also be applied in leading teams in any rapidly changing environment or some environment that may be unstable or needs to be adaptive as you lead them. It deals with a particular client that I was training in a Learjet. And I won't give you any names of anybody. I won't tell you the names of the other instructor or anything like this. We had an instructor who was actually sitting left seat for the client, being the non-flying pilot, so that the single client could get their training done. And this client was first-time jet experience and going through initial training to be a co-pilot in the Learjet. I actually gave him his check ride, and he did very fine on his check ride. He was a good pilot. And in fact, about a week ago, I gave the chief pilot a check ride, and the chief pilot and I were talking about him, and he said, yeah, the guy's really shown to be a good pilot and stuff. And so anything that I suggest here was just on one training session, not reflective of anybody involved. But it does illustrate a key aspect of when you're training somebody or when you're trying to develop somebody on your team, something that you have to be aware of. And it does bring in some aspects of neuroscience and how people think. I had this client on a cold weather day, so it was lower temperatures outside. We were kind of simulating a wintry scene on his training, and he was basically doing okay. But what was interesting is that on one takeoff, when I failed the engine to give him what we call a V1 cut, or a engine failure that's going to have him continue and get airborne single engine, the airplane got way off to the side of the runway inappropriately. And I froze the simulator. And the client was talking all about how they had the maximum rudder in and all this kind of stuff. And the instructor, again, I won't tell you who it was, I won't mention the name because it's unimportant. The instructor said, well, he had all the rudder in because I had my foot on and it was against the stops. Not realizing how unethical and unprofessional that was. Because a client or anybody that you're teaching never learns and develops if you're doing it for them. I didn't tell the instructor that. If it was just he and I outside, I would have. So with the client there, that was inappropriate. But I let the two kind of share that for about 30 seconds. And then I sat back and very candidly, but also very professionally and cordially said, gentlemen, what you both just gave me is complete and utter cop-out. And I looked at the client and I said, what was the root issue? And he was talking all about the pressure he was trying to put on the rudder pedals to get the airplane going straight. And I said, that's a symptom, it's not the issue. And he really didn't know where I was going, which would be logical with somebody that had never been in a jet before and all of this. What I told him was simply this. I said, what you don't understand is that for the certification of jet aircraft, all it requires is that you maintain directional control. Nothing says that you have to correct back against the operating engine. And I told the client, when we get into the debrief, I'll share an accident that happened about 28 years ago, where this was really brought to fruition throughout the Learjet community. And I said, the problem had nothing to do with your stick and rudder skills, as you're implying. The problem was in your thinking. I said you were thinking with a reactive schoolhouse mindset. The root problem was you let the airplane get off the center to begin with. I said, had you thought proactively, and this is where I told them the 3 Ps. I said, as a pilot, you have to think professionally, you have to demonstrate proficiency, and you have to think proactively. You have to think about not letting it get off to begin with. And that kind of was eye-opening to him. And at that point I said, so let me zap you back, we'll try it again. And this time, this client nailed it. And I mean plus or minus 0. So much so that as the airplane's climbing up, the instructor in the left seat spontaneously reacted by saying, and you could hear the surprise in his voice, spontaneously said, wow, nice. And in my mind, I'm going, yes, you develop them correctly and they do it right. And I looked at the client and I said, so do you feel the difference? And the client said, wow, yeah. And I said, that's what being a professional, proficient, proactive pilot does for you. That's what pilots have to be. And those are the 3 P's that I'm mentioning here. When you're talking about leading a team in a rapidly changing environment, very often it's how are you getting them to think, or how are you standing in the way of their thinking? You see, if you're the person in the other seat and you're pushing on the pedals, they don't have the opportunity to develop and understand what's required if you're doing it for them. When you're leading your team, your goal is not to do it for them. And that's where that dopamine fix that I sort of talked about in the last video on neuroscience, that sort of reward, that pat on the back and thump your own chest and everything, that can get in the way there. Your job is to not get in their way. Your job is to help them develop so that when you're not there, your team can reach radical results, even without your guidance at the moment. This client learned a lot, and when, like I said, when he got to his check ride, he did very, very well. And I gave him his check ride and signed him off as a pilot in the airplane. But you got to realize that when you're talking about leading a team in a rapidly changing environment, and a lot of rapidly changing environments are in aviation when unexpected things happen, you got to think of these 3 P's. As a leader, be professional. Being professional doesn't mean coming in and threatening them. It doesn't mean coming in and telling them what you got to do. It means how do you develop them professionally along the way? How do you help them get a sense to self-discover some of the insights that they need to have to be effective in this environment? How do you help them to think proactively instead of just reactively in sort of an academic mindset? Now sometimes the client may not get there. Sometimes they just may not get there. But that's for them to develop, not for us to do it for them. So it's just something to think about, and I just want to leave that with you today. When you're developing your team, when the team's looking to accomplish things, when you need them to perform together with synergy in a changing environment, when unexpected things come on the stage today, and you want radical results out of it, you get that by, along the way, interacting with them professionally. And very often that means being very professional, even if they screw something up. How do you tie that into developing them? Okay. Now, if it's something that's life-threatening or going to destroy the company or unethical or illegal, you may have to step in and squash it. No 2 ways about that. But apart from that, being professional means how do I really develop this team by asking those questions, helping them to gain the insights. That is different than everything else they've been told along the way. Being proficient. How do you build their proficiency? Not where they're just blindly going along with what you said, but how do they become proficient and build proficiency in them? And then are they thinking proactively rather than reactively? Because true leaders in a changing environment think proactively. As the team's going, they look ahead. Here's what's going on. What are the factors I'm not seeing? Am I aware of them? When something comes on that's going to be really tragic, what do I think that will be? What am I not seeing? And thinking ahead to say, hey, if that comes on, here's what we're going to need to do. Here's what we need to watch for. Those are the aspects that a leader has to be thinking about, not just kind of dictating to them along the way. And when you're talking about leading teams in a rapidly changing environment, much like this pilot client, if you will, that's the thinking that has to be. And that's what a true professional pilot does. And those 3 P's are what a true professional leader does. Not only that do they do it, but they model it and they develop it in their team. So look around your organization. In what ways is that being done perhaps well, or in what ways can that be done better? And I'll leave that with you for this week.